keeps us as a population from reaching our higher potentials, because they require a slower, more deliberate type of consciousness that cannot exist in that environment. And so it's important to sort of gain an understanding of what's out there and then understand how it's impacting us so that we can start to do something about it that is more constructive than destructive. And that's the mind. Ultimately, it's about our minds and how we use them and apply them in creating whatever we create in this reality. And these technologies interfere without fully informed consent and understanding of what it entails. I think we are at a very important time, a crossroads, where these technologies need to be recognized and then regulated properly.
Nick, they're making a population of road ragers. They're turning everybody inside and out. I can't tell you, since we were just talking about this, how many people have sent me special fast blast messages saying you're absolutely right, that, you know, this constant threat, this constant keeping people on edge is backfiring.
Yeah, I think it is, because people are going, wait a minute, you know, we want to think about us. We want solutions that affect individuals in a positive way. I mean, I think about what is the biggest, we look at across the country at some of the big problems facing us, education, and you look at the crisis in education. And yet we have technologies today that can solve much of the crisis in education. We have to rethink how we do it. We need new models for an old system. But when you look at some of the breakthroughs that have been made for enhancing brain performance that aren't even applied in most school districts, or if they're used in such a limited way. Neurobiofeedback, which I know you've talked about with other guests and something we've covered in the past. One of the most exciting areas, and only 40 school districts out of 15,000 in the country use it. And they can use it for attention deficit disorder. They can use it for hyperactivity, to train children to get into this ideal state of learning, this zone, this alpha range of real creative intellectual possibilities. And they can learn how to do this in about 30 to 40 sessions of an hour apiece. And they don't need Ritalin anymore. They don't need the psychoactive drugs anymore. But more importantly, or as important at least, is the fact that the same technology can be applied to average learners or accelerated learners and enhance their potentials as well. And we're not applying technology in the ways that we truly could within learning environments. And I think that's a huge mistake, because it costs us a fortune if you look at school budgets around the country. And yet they're delivering, in my opinion, less and less as the decades move on, when the technology should allow us to do more and more.
Tell me a little bit about electronic telepathy and enhancing true ESP.
Well, and this is, again, sort of the stimulation of the brain. And there's been some things that have been done to stimulate brain performance. Synthetic telepathy, what I spoke about earlier about Bill Bice and Elizabeth Rauscher's experiments in the 1980s, you know, the idea that you can recreate that. And when you think about telepathy, and I mentioned it before, it's kind of like becomes Judgment Day. I mean, if everyone suddenly gained that capability, you have to be pretty self-forgiving, because we all have a lot in our histories just as human beings. And then you have to be forgiving of everyone else, which would be a pretty big jump. And some people probably couldn't handle that very well. But you think about it, this is going to happen. In terms of the transparency of the individual mind is only based upon our ability to break down the calculations and interpret them precisely, and we are very close to that.
More to come with Nick Begich in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And we're back with Nick Begich. Nick, what do you mean by brain mapping?
The idea of looking at what is actually happening in real time with the brain, and then on a more fine level is this idea of being able to look at really complete brain function in real time. And the idea eventually is that if you can monitor what's going on and you can map it correctly, then you can take and recreate signals that will duplicate that in another individual. And that's that whole idea of transferring states of consciousness, literally by measuring one person's in real time, determining what's going on, and then trying to impose that on another. And that's part of this direction in this technology that's emerging. And when you think about that, you know, there may be all kinds of good reasons to map the brain. I mean, you think about brain injuries and the things, the science around sort rewiring the brain and getting the brain to function differently and kind of overcome physical damage. That's one aspect of it. The idea of functioning in a better way. When you think about attention deficit disorder children, oftentimes it's not what we think it is. It can be a lot of other things. Food allergies are one. Normal childhood is another at a certain point.
Exactly.
But when we really have these things, the idea of slowing a child down or speeding a child up, in terms of their brain function, this can be learned just the same as exercising a muscle on the body. And biofeedback can provide that vehicle. It's also used for addictive behaviors. It's used for a lot of different therapies and for just enhancing performance. When you think about the left and the right brain arguments, the idea of the creative and the analytical and how we deal with young children, often we end up typesetting them in such a way that little girls end up developing more creative attributes and intuitive attributes, that side of the brain, and little boys tend to be more analytical. And that's what it used to be. It's not so much that anymore. Now we kind of do it all sort of the wrong way equally. But the idea that both hemispheres need to work together, and there are technologies that enhance that, so the creative and the intellectual work together. And most people that I've met that are really brilliant, I'm sure some of the brighter people will say, the best things didn't happen in sort of this constructed, analytical way. It was those leaps of intuition. That was the more valuable attribute. And that's why I say, and I think I said it in the earlier segment, is all of us, every person on the planet has that as a starting point, which is pretty remarkable.
It is remarkable. We just have to train ourselves to really perform.
Right.
How can you do that?
Well, there's several things. I mean, there's all the old techniques of reducing stress that allow for more coherent thinking, whether it's breathing techniques or certain disciplines. Almost every religion, every philosophy ties together some sense of slowing the mind or stilling the mind so that you can do some real work. There's also now technologies that can assist in this. There's light and sound devices, there's electrocranial stimulation, there's binaural beat or bioaural beat that was developed by Monroe. And Monroe, incidentally, was the guy that sort of pioneered for most lay people this whole OBE or out-of-body.
Sure. Robert, you're talking about Robert Monroe, right?
Right. And he developed the hemisync systems and the patents that went along with that back, it was I think back in the 70s when those original patents were beginning to evolve. And what they did is they used sound to create a whole brain effect where both hemispheres began to work together so that you really amplified your possibilities. And they did it in two ways. One was with just sound and tones that put you in that general state, and then they would overlay voiceovers in some of the tracks, not all of them. Some were voice layovers, but they weren't subliminals, so you could actually hear what the heck people were saying to you, which is extremely important. Subliminals, if you can't hear them, could set up conflicts within your own, way you shape and frame your reality in terms of word symbols. So I kind of like that, but more importantly, what he discovered was that these various tonal arrangements could stimulate various parts of the brain and cause these kind of anomalous sort of experiences. And the same was true with light and sound devices. As they evolved, people reported heightened intuition. They reported lots of different things that weren't so much related to the device as related to their own consciousness. The device just was sort of a catalyst for stimulating something within the mind, within the brain, physically, that caused some changes. Persinger did this too. Persinger at Laurentian University used magnetic solenoids in a big helmet. It looks kind of a strange operation. He was actually he was on a program on CBC with me where he had his deal where you could see the solenoids. And what he did is he created in people that had no previous experience in this area, the out-of-body experience, the abduction experience, and a lot of other of these anomalous experiences by essentially firing these magnetic solenoids and stimulating the brain in various ways. But all of this, when you start to look at it, whether it's electronically stimulated or in the earlier CIA programs, drug-induced,